apologize first and foremost about the lecture time and date changing. Something came up at the last minute that I had to attend to around 1. So I do apologize for that. All the other lectures should still happen at 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. rather, not 1 a.m. But beyond that, I do want to just go ahead and record this so I can upload it and everyone can kind of watch it whenever it works best for them. Also, I wanted to make a quick note about the exam bonus points. So basically how that's going to work is if you attend the lecture live, you can speak up to 2 times. Well, you can speak really infinite times, but you're able to get up to 2 points on each exam. So, for example, if you spoke, if I had some sort of a discussion question or something, you spoke up, I'd write your name down, and at the end of the lecture, whatever, I'd make sure to add the points. And then also, because this is an online class that really at an official university, or let me rephrase that, without a university sanctioned time, you can also, of course, put it inside of the comments, and I'll make sure to give you a point on the exam for that. So if you have any questions about that, just drop it inside the teams or let me know, and I'll certainly get to them. But beyond that, I do want to go ahead and start the lecture for Chapter 1. So if you have any questions, certainly let me know. Okay, so the slides for Lecture 1 should be coming up here. Okay, here we go. So yeah, today's all about introducing information systems, telling what they are, how they're used, all that sort of stuff. So, the first thing to kind of do is to define what information systems are, and we'll do that in just a little bit. We'll talk about how organizations use them, and we'll also talk about how information systems and technology on the whole affects society. So we're going to skip this survey for now. But basically, I don't ever like to have a lot of exam questions that focus on definitions. That's more of a quiz thing. In the exams, I really like to see, can you apply the concepts? Can you take what the concepts are talking about and apply them to business problems? I say I don't like to focus on definitions, but definitions are still important because if we don't understand what the concepts are, it'd be very challenging to apply them. It's like, at the very basic level, you have to have the knowledge of what something is to be able to then apply it and to be able to, solve problems with it. So let's just start by reading this definition for information system off. It's something that collects, processes, stores, analyzes, and disseminates information for specific purposes. So basically, it's just a system that is going to be involved with collecting information. It's going to be involved with processing that information, making sense of it. That's what this is all about. So probably the most famous example of that is going to be an ERP, which stands for Enterprise Resource Planning System. And basically what this is a system that is basically all-encompassing within an organization. So if we are a company, it's going to encompass pretty much everything we do. So at the basic level, we have down here finance and accounting. And that's going to be any sort of transaction that comes through. We're going to have that all inside of one place. It's going to be very beneficial from that perspective. To be able to kind of have all the financial information. We can easily run analysis on stuff to see what are our sales. We could see which region is having those sales. Anything with that. It's not just sales. It's any sort of financial information is all within that place. We can see where each dollar flows in the organization. Human resources. That's a very important thing to have. We need to know where our employees are, what they do, how much we're paying them, other information. Beyond that, for example, how much our competitors are paying their employees. We get that information. That could be good for us to have. It could be good for recruiting aspects. Where do we need to have more employees? Where could we maybe have fewer employees? How can we best utilize our human resources? That's all encompassed within this ERP. Manufacturing. So traditionally, ERPs are designed for manufacturing companies. However, they're not exclusive to manufacturing firms. A lot of firms don't do manufacturing, but they still use ERP. This is really whatever the primary business activity is. So we will talk about the Porter's value chain in, I believe, Chapter 10. But the whole idea is that we have primary business activity. That's what is primarily driving our revenue. And then we also have support activities. That's everything else. Mostly stuff we have to do, but it could be other things as well. IS in most cases is not going to be a primary business activity. In most cases, it's going to be a support activity. But really, I would like to think of, instead of saying manufacturing, we would instead say primary business activity. And this is going to have things like inventories. This is going to have things like what do we need to do to basically generate value. We also have supply chain management. Of course, that is things like, shipping times, all that sort of stuff in the supply chain. We have an entire chapter on supply chain, so don't worry about it too much for now. We have project management. Of course, the difference between a project and a process is that in a project has a set start date and a set end date, whereas a process is something that's going to be ongoing. It has neither a start date nor an end date. But the whole idea behind both is that you have something that's going to get done that's going to be not necessarily completely separate from your standard operations, but typically we think of it as being separate from, your standard primary and business activities. And then lastly, customer relationship management. Having a database that keeps track of all of our customers and, what they do, what they purchase from us, even information like who their family are, because you want to know that stuff if you're going to be doing a lot of sales so you can better reach your customers. We have a whole chapter on that, so I'm not going to focus too much on it for now. Let me know if there's any questions. Certainly feel free to interrupt me if you need to. But there's some other types of information systems as well, and these are very important. You probably see an exam question or two on these, I'd imagine. You'll definitely see one on ERP, so make sure you're aware of what the components are and kind of why the components are there, and just make sure that you know that these are all integrated with each other. This is one system that houses basically the entire organization's operations. So yeah, some other types of information systems. These are going to be more specific to a purpose. They're not for the entire organization, but they certainly serve a more distinct purpose. So a decision support system is going to be an information system that is in place to provide support for different actions. So a lot of times these are in the form of doing like a comparison between several different options. It'll go ahead and tell you what the likely outcomes of this are. So for example, if you're a bank and you have a decision support system in place to tell whether someone should get a loan or should not get a loan. Well, the thing with the decision support system is that in the traditional sense, it's not going to tell you this person cannot get a loan. It's going to suggest maybe a likelihood that this person will default on their loan. And it'll, of course, factor in things like credit score, their income, maybe their other debts, which I guess would technically be in credit score as well. So maybe you'd have a little bit of multicollinearity there, but certainly that's the whole premise, is that it's not actually telling you what to do. That's not a decision support system. Instead, it's providing you with support and, giving you one place to kind of have all that information and maybe giving you some likelihoods based on previous decisions that were made. Transaction processing systems are going to be used by organizations to handle transactions. Why am I getting off track here? Yeah, so the entire concept with these is that you have transactions that are taking place. A sale is happening. You're buying something. Either way, it's going to go through the transaction processing system. And the entire concept with these is that they run very efficiently and allow you to have very many transactions. If you didn't have a transaction processing system, it'd be a lot more difficult to have sales. Probably be a lot more cash-based as well, because transaction processing systems are used pretty heavily by credit cards and allowing for non-cash payments to take place. Just imagine if you're at a grocery store and instead of scanning all the barcodes, they had a little calculator there and they added up the total and you paid in cash. That'd be kind of difficult. It would certainly be a lot slower, I think it's fair to say, than what we have today, where a lot of times you don't even have a cashier at all, depending on which store you go to. Executive support systems, as the name implies, they're going to provide information that's relevant to executives. So the primary audience is probably going to be C-level executives. This could be things like very large strategic decisions, like site selections, stuff like that, where it's going to focus on the executive perspective and have things that are heavily tied to what executives care about, basically. Expert systems, they're going to be systems that are designed and kind of put in place to provide very specific guidance and very specific information for one very specific role. So these could be things like if you have your primary business activity, let's say, is making pizza. So maybe your expert system would be things that have lots of pizza recipes, lots of pizza techniques to make good pizza. It would also have things like how do you order the best ingredients for the lowest price. That's all going to be inside of an expert system. It typically is going to relate to your primary business activity, but it doesn't have to. Knowledge management systems. We actually have an entire chapter on this that we'll get to. Probably not the most exciting chapter, but it's a good chapter. Basically, the whole concept behind this is that it's a information system that stores, frequently asked questions, maybe. Possibly it stores, knowledge-based articles, things about what your organization is doing and basically how to do them. So these are great. They really are beneficial if you have an organization that has a lot of turnover, or even one that doesn't have a lot of turnover, but still maybe, they aid in communication. Because if you can imagine an organization that has substantial amount of turnover, there may be a lot of cases in which there is organizational knowledge that could be lost if the person leaves. So if it's recorded inside the knowledge management system, that knowledge is less likely to be lost. And then lastly, we have financial market systems. And those are going to be systems that basically enable the trading of something. So it could be trading of stocks, it could be trading of exchange traded funds, it could be trading of equity, whatever the case may be. Sorry, I dropped my pen there. Yeah, so the whole concept is that these are going to be something where you basically can have information about something that you want to purchase. And it's typically going to be something financial, of course, which is in the name there. And, we have a lot of examples of those. We have Bloomberg, for example. If you're ever on campus and you come into the McCool, you've probably seen the Strategic Finance Lab. It's right there across from, I think it's called the E Center or something. I don't know. But anyway, I highly recommend you check out the Bloomberg terminals when you get a chance. They're great tools. I would highly recommend them for any business major, or even anyone who's just interested in finance. They have a ton of great information in there. They actually have free training built into them, so you can basically type in BMC, stands for Bloomberg Market Concepts. It's great training to do if you ever get a chance. And that's something that if you take nothing away from this course other than that, check out the Bloomberg terminals. But also take a lot more away from the course than just that. So let's talk a little bit about IT. If there's any questions, feel free to jump in here. Basically, IT is comprised primarily of four things. It's comprised of hardware, software, databases, and network. And basically what this implies is that we have IT, in the hardware sense. So we think of hardware. Hardware is basically just, computers. Any sort of physical device is considered hardware if it's a technological device. So maybe even smartphones if they're owned by the organization or managed by the organization. Anything like that we're going to have is going to be considered hardware. Also, things like video conferencing equipment is probably also going to be hardware. So things like that organizations use to conduct their business or to support their business, however they use them. Software is going to be, of course, the applications that are run by the organization to enable the hardware to do something. If you have a computer sitting there that doesn't have any hardware on it, in most cases, it's not going to be very useful to an organization. Especially if it doesn't even have like an operating system. That's also software. So basically, software is what enables the running of applications, which of course are why we actually have the hardware in the first place. Databases are basically just a way to say, I wouldn't necessarily use a term database here. I would use a more generic term like file storage, but that's just me. The whole concept is that we have the hardware and the software, and then we also have data associated with it. So we don't just limit ourselves to having, the software. We also have maybe past performance data. All of our data is going to be stored, in some way. So I wouldn't necessarily use the term data storage here. Our database, I would instead use maybe data storage. Something that doesn't imply that it's in a structured database, because most of the data, frankly, is not going to be inside a database. Then lastly, we have network, which of course is just the communication between these different devices. And this could be inter-organization, this could be extra-organization. But we're not going to focus too much on network quite yet. We do have two chapters actually on network. We'll cover them both in the same day. They're pretty interrelated. Database as well. We have a chapter on that. And software, we have a technology guide on, and hardware, I believe we also have a technology guide on. So each of these components are what make up IT, and we have basically a chapter or at least a couple pages on each of them. Now, information systems is all of those things, and it's also people and processes. So when we think of information technology, in the definitional sense, I should say, it is basically technology. But when we add in information systems, we also add in the people that comprise the organization. And we also add in the processes that those people go through to enable technology to be used in the organization. So really the only difference between IT and IS is that IS is more encompassing in its scope in that it includes both people and processes. There will be a test question about that, but I'll also say this, and that is that in most organizations, they have an IT department, and the IT department in most organizations includes people and processes. So I would say that most organizations don't actually make a distinction, but there is a distinction, and for the exam, certainly know what that distinction is. So I hope that's clear. Let's take a brief look at this chart. I think this is a very interesting chart here. It might not be figure 1.5 in the book. I really don't know. But anyway, it is in the book somewhere. So, certainly it could be different in your version of the book that you're using. But this is a really interesting chart because what this shows the organization, and basically this is going to be an inter-organizational information system. We'll get to that, I believe, in chapter 10. But the whole concept is that we have information that's flowing throughout an organization, and it's flowing enabled by an information system. So we have customers, they're ordering stuff, they're paying us, and in return, we're giving them product. Could be digital product, could also be physical products, but they're interfacing with us through an information system. And then we have business-to-business transactions happening in a similar way. You probably don't need to make that distinction in a chart, but you can. So we also have orders and payments and products flowing. And then we also have supplier relationships. So with suppliers, we're getting information from them, we're ordering from them, and we're paying them, and they're shipping us materials. So we'll cover supply chain management, talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. But the whole concept is that we have relationships with suppliers, and we need to purchase stuff from them in a business-to-business fashion. So we're selling to people, we're selling goods or services to businesses, maybe we're selling to customers, but we're also purchasing stuff. So all that can be enabled through an information system, and it can be pretty seamless if done properly or done well. So kind of shift gears a little bit here, talk about some benefits of technology. So of course, there's a lot of things that technology does to help out society. Of course, you can also read a lot of things that technology does to maybe not help society, but you can make of that what you will. I'm not here to state my opinion on it, but certainly having technology can make things a lot more accessible. So recently, there was the GAAP Day, and I don't remember exactly what that stands for, but it has to do with something about accessibility. I really should know what that stands for. Sorry about that. But anyway, it was a big drive to have, make sure that any document, any website, anything that's published is accessible to people with disabilities. So I think it stood for something about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I think that's what it stood for. Certainly, you probably want to double check me on that. It's not on the exam, but certainly it's an exciting thing. It's something that makes technology accessible to, or makes stuff accessible to people through the technology. So for example, if I make a PowerPoint slide and I have a graphic like this, I should have added a caption to this. I didn't, but I should have. And that way, if someone were blind, they could use a screen reader, and they could still figure out what that image was. I don't believe I have any blind students this semester, so I didn't do that. It's something I should do, but it's not something I do. And this is built into Microsoft Office, pretty much all the applications now. You can use the accessibility checker, and it'll tell you stuff like that and suggest ways to improve your presentations or documents or whatever you're using. That's something that can really be good. Of course, devices also have, things to assist people with various disabilities. So that's something that's very good, and it's something that through technology is far less costly than it would be through other means. If you imagine having having to have a personal assistant hired if you were blind, for example, that'd be quite costly. Whereas with technology, maybe you don't need to have a personal assistant. Technology plus, of course, other service but you get the idea. It certainly reduces the cost of accommodating, which is a good thing. And then we also have, having better understanding in analytics. So if we think back to the financial market system that we talked about a couple slides ago, this is something that really kind of factors in here and enables us to have a far better understanding than we could otherwise. So if you think back, 30 years, it's not that long ago, you couldn't just go get a 10K from a company, it's annual filing, from a company in a matter of seconds. You couldn't just scan through it quickly and, you'd have to read through it. There would be no control F. There would be no search in page. So, we can very rapidly understand things. This goes well beyond, picking stocks or whatever we do. This extends into everything. We can see a lot more information. We can process it with, power that wasn't possible 30 years ago. If used to be, if you wanted to look into a company's annual filings, you probably got it mailed to you. And if you had, say, 10 different stocks, that's not that many, stock in 10 different companies, you'd probably get a lot of paper mailed to you. You're talking about thousands of pages. And you'd have to read through that if you were interested. And, it'd be a lot more difficult to make real-time decisions. We talk about the efficient market hypothesis. That's really enabled by technology in a large sense. Because, we can have very rapid changes. If you're on the Bloomberg terminals, that's going to be probably, I would say, one of the fastest platforms for this is, having the ability to have understanding. We can easily drill down into information. We could do all kinds of things. It's really beneficial from that perspective. Health and safety as well has benefited from technology. We think about, a lot of the hospital equipment is going to be tied in to technology, and it's going to really enable us to see real-time data, to see how a patient's doing. And we can, in some senses, and again, I'm kind of getting out of my traditional wheelhouse here, but I would imagine that with that, we can probably staff our facilities more efficiently and reduce cost. Because if we can know exactly how each patient is doing, what their vital signs are at any given time, we don't need to have it monitored as closely in person. Maybe we can have things more central. Of course, I don't think that healthcare costs are going down, but that's a completely different discussion. We could. That's something that technology can benefit. Security. This is both physical security, digital security. Something that benefits it greatly. We think about a large organization. Imagine if we use physical security for an organization the size of, let's use Walmart as an example. Imagine if they didn't have any sort of card access, or they didn't have any sort of non-physical security. Well, every time that they would let someone go, they'd probably have to change the locks. That'd be quite difficult for an organization of Walmart's size. Of course, I use them as an example. I'm pretty sure they don't use digital access, but that's a different story. Imagine they did. A hotel. Let's use a hotel. That's probably a better example here, because those organizations mostly have been using, sort of digital access for the past 20 years at least. And, that's very beneficial. It makes things a lot more secure because as a guest leaves, they can't make a copy of the key. The key will no longer be active. And, if they want to access the room later, they have to, basically book it again, or, say, hey, I left something in there. Can you let me in real fast? That's something that is not really possible without technology. If you had to have a maintenance person change the locks on a door every single time someone left a hotel room, it'd be pretty unfeasible. And, security goes well beyond this. We also have security cameras, of course. We have extremely high resolution security cameras. We can do facial recognition. We can know exactly who was in a building at what time, where they were, what they were doing. And, there's certainly a lot of controversy surrounding that. I'm not going to go into that too much, but that is something that is taking place. Then also we have cost and standard of living. So with many things, with the advent of technology, the cost has greatly diminished. Go back to the example of a financial market system. Used to be you had some sort of a stockbroker or something. They were basically taking a very large commission every time you did a transaction. And now that's kind of changed a lot. We have trades that can happen at $0. Many brokerages do that. That was kind of a recent thing with I'd probably say that Robinhood started a lot of that, but there are many other platforms now that have zero commission trades, and that's huge. That certainly is very beneficial to day traders in particular. They're not having to pay a commission every time they make a transaction, a buy or a sale. That's one example of technology helping costs. There's really a multitude of technology reducing the cost of goods and services. There's also examples of technology raising the cost of goods and services, but I think that by and large, I think that it's going to have an overall effect of, in most cases, reduce the cost of goods and services. And also, it affects the standard of living greatly. So go back to my example. 50 years ago, what was life like? Well, there was no internet. You probably didn't have a personal computer. You didn't have a smartphone. Probably didn't even have, well, you definitely didn't have a cell phone either. It wasn't invented. You fast forward 30 years, you might have had a cell phone, maybe. But as we've progressed, our standard of living has increased pretty substantially. And that's something that's very beneficial to society as a whole. So we'll take just a moment here. You want to throw in anything about technology and if it's beneficial or harmful? You don't have to, but like I say, I'll give you some points on exam 1 if you would like to add anything here, or just about anything we've talked about. That's certainly fine. Like I say, I don't require participation or anything like that. Well, not for lectures, but for the group assignments we will. But that's a different story. So yeah, I mean, certainly you also have the opportunity, of course, if you're watching this later or if you're watching it now, you can also, of course, share your thoughts in chapter 1 on that little discussion thing that I posted. Just make sure you do it by midnight tonight. That way I can add the points. Otherwise, it will technically be late, and I don't accept late assignments. So. But again, this is not really an assignment. It's more of a bonus point, so keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit about how technology affects disciplines. So accounting is one that has been greatly impacted by technology. We have digital bookkeeping. We have digital auditing. In fact, I think the 4 major accounting firms now, I believe that they're all doing IS auditing now. They're auditing information systems in addition to auditing, financial systems. And of course, they're doing that for several reasons. They're doing that to look for any discrepancies in how transactions are handled, but they're also doing that to ensure the security of systems. They're doing that to ensure really a lot of different things. There's not just one purpose that they audit information systems for, but it's not uncommon to have an accounting firm do an IS audit. I think that's kind of funny in a way. But yeah, certainly, having everything done digitally. I can only imagine working for a huge firm, talking like a Fortune 500 firm, as an accountant, 50 years ago. I don't think I could do it, having all the paper transactions and the paper ledger, and it would probably span, a whole floor of a huge building, a huge skyscraper. It'd be something I don't think I could do. But I mean, certainly people did it. And, we did have large transactions. We did have large companies back then. Not as large as they are today, of course, but still pretty large. Marketing, we have digital marketing. We have basically the entire medium of the internet. We have things like how do we promote our company? Do we use social platforms? Do we use website ads? Do we use newspaper ads? These are decisions we didn't have to make, 30 years ago. Basically, we used either newspaper or something local. And now, we can also, in addition to reaching a wider audience, we can also do this more efficiently, and we can get a lot more insight from who we reach. And in addition to that, not only can we get more insight about it, we can also, of course, sell our product globally. at a very low cost to us. That's something we could not do really that long ago. So finance and economics, of course, we've talked about those a good bit. Basically just getting a lot more information, getting it a lot quicker, and being able to more rapidly react to change. That really supports the efficient market hypothesis, and it allows us to basically react to changes real time. This is something that is, unprecedented in a lot of cases. The ability to do that, and it's really benefited the financial markets pretty handily. They've certainly been able to react to changes. People have been able to not lose money where maybe they otherwise would have. It's been very good. Management HR, we've also talked about this. We have a whole chapter on this as well, so I won't go too much into it. But the whole concept is that with management and HR, we can basically make sure that each employee is benefiting our organization. They're doing what their organization needs. So there could be cases in which we would reassign employees from an area. Maybe we need to hire more employees for an area. Or maybe demand has shrunk and we need to look at reducing our workforce a little bit. Each of those are going to be benefited by IS because we can have a kind of bird's eye view of an entire organization and what's happening with sales, what's happening with production, what's happening with support activities. All of that we can see in one place. And then lastly, production. Whatever our primary business activity is, it's going to be affected by information systems in some way and technology in some way. Okay, so I do want to just kind of take a brief moment here to talk about the market capitalization of firms. So on the left here, I have 2019. So first quarter 2019, second quarter, so on and so forth. And then 2020 on the right. And let's face it, we know that something, of course, happened in 2020. Pandemic, unfortunately, broke out. And that affected a lot of companies pretty substantially, affected a lot of people as well. So with that in mind, let's kind of take a look at some of these market caps. So first quarter 2019, we have Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Berkshire Hathaway, Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent, Johnson & Johnson, and Visa. And I realize I don't have only business majors, and some people may have not taken a lot of classes yet. What a market cap is it's basically going to be the common shares outstanding times the market price. So the price per common share, basically. And that gives us a valuation of what the firm is worth. And this could be a review for a lot of you, but just kind of want to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. So this is a great way to determine what investors believe a company is worth. So this is a really measure that's used a lot. It's not the only measure of company value. It's not the only measure, of course, but it's certainly one that is commonly used. So just kind of get that out of the way there. So we see a pretty big trend here. We look at Apple in the 2020 second quarter. Apple has a $1.5 trillion market cap. That's huge. Microsoft has a $1.5 trillion market cap. In fact, we could actually round that up to 1.6 trillion. Amazon has it looks like they have 1.4 trillion. And that's huge. I mean, they did hit a 1 trillion market cap, I believe, in September 2018. Someone will have to double check me on that sometime, but I'm pretty sure that Amazon has hit a 1 trillion market cap before. But typically they have been below 1 trillion, and most companies, of course, are below 1 trillion. 1 trillion is a very large size for a firm to be. Alphabet is at 9.7 billion, and that's pretty large as well. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions in just 1 billion, and then we have trillions, which is hundreds of billions. I mean, that's huge. So, we look at these, that when we see a trend, and I'm not going to, say that it's technology firms, the only firms that can be valuable. But when we look at what investors value most, they tend to value technology firms. Apple, they're, of course, a technology firm. They make and sell hardware, and they also make some software that they sell, but mostly they make and sell hardware. Microsoft, they do make and sell hardware, but they primarily make and sell software and services. Amazon, they sell services and they also sell products, and of course they're a huge retailer. Alphabet, they're the parent company of Google as well as many other companies, and they primarily make and sell or they primarily sell services. I guess you don't really make a service. But I mean, this is certainly the trend here. Facebook. They sort of sell advertising and other things. Tencent, that's a Chinese company. They're involved in a lot of technology firms in China. And, they're not exclusive to technology, though, so I wouldn't call them a technology firm. Alibaba is a large e-retailer. They're kind of similar to Amazon over here, only pretty substantially different in terms of the goods that are sold. Berkshire Hathaway, of course, is going to be a financial services firm, primarily. Let me see. I can't tell what this other company is right here. It's covered up by the interface here. Whoops. But anyway, certainly we look at the top 5 companies. It's pretty consistent that they're IT firms. There's some exceptions, but mostly we see that IT firms are heavily valued by investors. And that's a good thing. That means that we should focus on, what technology is, talk about IT generating firms versus IT using firms as a distinction. I'm not going to bore you with that too much right now. But this is certainly a trend that we're seeing. And, we think about risk. We're going to talk about risk in another chapter. Pretty much everything's in another chapter, it seems. But, we talk about risk. And, IT is something that can be very useful in things like a business continuity plan, where maybe the government locks us all down and they say, you can't leave your home unless it's an emergency. Well, we can still work with technology in some cases. So, that's going to greatly benefit technology firms. Let's go ahead and just get that out of the way there. But it's not going to be beneficial to other types of firms. There's some firms that are going to be greatly impacted by something like that. Travel, transportation industries. Those are both going to be pretty adversely impacted by a policy that says you can't leave your house. Or maybe there could be a natural disaster that happens. It doesn't have to be related to the current situation. Unfortunately, natural disaster could do something very similar, where people are unable to leave. Maybe an earthquake happens and people can't leave. So certainly having the ability to work from home is a great factor in reducing corporate risk. And that's something that we're going to see and likely continue to see the impact of that. Okay, so now I want to kind of talk about automation and how it impacts your job, or jobs in general, not necessarily your specific job. So the book takes this topic, and in my opinion, it doesn't present it in an unbiased way. It says, basically what it says is that IT will take your job. And I don't think it's a fair thing to say, that it's going to, basically lead to unemployment. I don't think it's a fair thing to say. And it's not necessarily that I believe that it won't, or that there aren't cases of it doing so. I just don't like the idea that you're going to present something like that in such a definitive manner when it's really an opinion. So I have this article here. I believe this is from 1946. I believe it's a New York Times piece where it says, look what they're doing to your job. And basically what this is saying is that, with factories and, things becoming more and more automated and more using economies of scale, stuff like that, that you probably won't have a job. This is talking about this is going to lead to mass unemployment and stuff. 1946. And then, I looked at this. This is also another New York Times article published in 2016. I should probably find a new one, but haven't yet. Basically, what this is saying is that, automation is going to be a long-term job killer. It's going to reduce the amount of jobs that are in the country. And, I don't think there's a lot of evidence for that. That's my opinion, is that, there's certainly, at minimum, there's another side to this argument. And that is that it hasn't ever happened. There have been periods of unemployment, and there have been periods of, people maybe having to change careers, but there hasn't been, at least not in my opinion, not by my interpretation of the information, there hasn't been a massive reduction in the amount of jobs available. There have been temporarily, as we can see here. So we have the early 2000s recession. This is the dot-com bust, and this is also post the events of 2001. And, we can see there was certainly a rise in unemployment there, a couple percentage. In the 2008, 2009 mortgage crisis, there was a very substantial rise in unemployment there. We're talking, going from about 5%, which is considered to be low unemployment, to, upwards of 10%. And that's considered to be extremely high unemployment. And, based on those unemployment rates, they have come back down. Until recently, they were about 3%, which is considered extremely low unemployment. However, that's not the entire picture either. We also look at the labor force participation rate, which is basically the percentage of able-bodied adults who are participating in the labor force. Now, this is a way to kind of see what is happening overall to the jobs. So as we see here, used to be about 67% participated. Then we had that recessionary period where about, I would say, 2% of people, or 2% more, became unemployed. And basically in that same time period, it looks like we kind of fell about 0.5% in labor force participation rate. Then, of course, we had the 2008, 2009 mortgage crisis. And post that, this has since risen a little bit to around 64% as of about March. Of course, after March, everything kind of happened, unfortunately. But, there has been a couple percentage decrease in labor force participation rate. So, there's basically two sides to this argument. You can look at it in the unemployment rate and say, well, no, people are not working. People are, in fact, still working despite automation, despite all this other stuff. And you can also look at the labor force participation rate and say, well, that's not the entire picture. So, truthfully, I don't think it's as simplistic as the book presents. And I'm not here to say what I personally believe will happen with, automation or anything. That's not really my job as an instructor. But I just want to make sure that you kind of have the what's going on, basically the picture here. Okay. So it looks like I got a comment here. Do I think it's more possible with the current pandemic that automation is possible, or that further unemployment is possible, or less participation in labor force? I certainly think that automation will continue to rise. I'd hate to say this, but in some way, I think the automation in food industries, especially fast food in particular, could be very beneficial to health as a whole. I hate to say that, that would possibly lead to job loss, but it's also possible it wouldn't lead to job loss. Those people would instead go work at another place. Amazon is hiring hundreds of thousands of people. Walmart's hiring hundreds of thousands of people. Long term, I don't know what will happen. It's an interesting discussion. Certainly one that I think could be, something that could happen. We are seeing, though, increasingly fast food places becoming more focused on automation. And traditionally, that has been, a place that hired, on average, let's say between 100 and 150 employees at any given time to work. And, they're open 24/7. Well, now they're not open 24/7 in a lot of cases. The Walmart in Starkville, I believe, is open about, I want to say it's like 11 p.m. They close and they reopen at maybe 6 or 7 in the morning. I'm not sure exactly, but certainly possible. What do you think about it? Do you think that it'll lead to more automation? Do you think that it'll be at a pretty constant rate? Do you think it'll lead to less? And that's kind of my thoughts on it. So certainly. Yeah, that's kind of what I view. And it could certainly lead to having less face-to-face interaction as well. This is something that we could see fewer cashier jobs, for example. Been to a lot of places lately, and they have the kind of plexiglass set up. And I think it's very possible that self-checkout will see, kind of a rise or whatever. Maybe we'll have kind of situations in which stores can operate in a hybrid model. Walmart's a great example of this, where you can use their little app and you can have the Walmart associates pick out your groceries for you. We also have services that do that. I think Kroger has something similar where they have, of course, I think theirs costs a little bit of money. But I mean, I think that there will certainly be some changes from it. What those changes are, I think it's too early to tell when long term. But in the short term, we're certainly seeing, basically just a lot of hour reduction and closures, which are unfortunate. I'm not I'm certainly not celebrating any of this. Don't get me wrong. But certainly, I think that some changes will probably happen. Um, I think it's unlikely, though, that the labor force participation rate is going to decrease more than 2% in the next, I would probably say 5 years. I think it's unlikely that we'll see that. But it's something we could see, and that would be very unfortunate if we did. So let's talk a little bit about salaries. I'm not trying to make you change your what you're wanting to do in your career or anything like that. But certainly is good to consider, what different careers make. So, it's kind of a thing that you do. I'm sure your accounting classes did something similar where they say accountings make great money. It's just some different salaries here. These are averages I pulled from, looks like I pulled them from Earnest. So just kind of talk about these a little bit. This is pulled from CIO.com, some of the different salaries for different jobs within IT. So data analyst, that's probably a little low, I would say, for data analyst, particularly at a large firm. If you're working in a large city, you could probably pull in quite a substantial amount more than that, particularly if you have a master's, or in a lot of cases, you need to have a PhD to do a lot of those jobs. They'd be pretty involved. Certainly, there are going to be some jobs like that where you wouldn't need a master's or PhD. But to really do a lot of the more advanced things, to kind of use a lot of the more advanced tests, that'd probably be what they would require. Let's just say that. Data architect, those might be a little on the higher end, depending on what that involves. Data warehouse engineer, again, those could be on the higher end. Different database analysts, that's what DBA stands for. I think that those are possibly on the higher end as well. But certainly once you get more experience in a job, of course, your salary will rise, or it's definitely going to rise with experience. So yeah, just kind of keep that in mind, that that's kind of how we see these taking place. You're going to be pretty high salaries. BI analyst, BI architect, developer. Things like that can be quite lucrative, but it does depend on area. Certain areas cost less to live in, and then the flip side is that you probably have less money. It's, kind of how economic works at the basic level. If everyone is working in an area and they make, let's say the median salary is 150,000, that means they have 150,000 to spend. So the market's going to adjust to that. They're going to be more willing to spend money. So things are going to tend to cost more. The flip side is we have an area where the average, or median income rather, is going to be, say, 25,000. It's going to be a lot poorer of an area, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be able to purchase things. Certainly some things maybe would be priced at a national, but some things would be priced at a more local level, particularly things like food and shelter. So that's why when we look at big cities, their rent tends to be quite a bit more than rent in, say, Starkville, Mississippi, or some other place in Mississippi, or just any rural area. Typically, it's going to have a lot lower cost of living. Of course, that's kind of a big thing. So again, I'm not going to bore you with all these salaries, but that's pretty much it. Today is really just about defining what information systems are, talking about how information systems are used by organizations, and then also kind of looking forward, looking at the societal impact, thinking about what this could lead to in the future. So certainly that's about all I had. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to get off here and get this posted on YouTube. Thanks for attending, by the way. I do want to apologize to everyone again for having to change the time. This is only for today. Next class and future classes will be at 1 p.m. again. I just had something come up last minute that I had to attend to. So any questions or other comments? And I'll make sure to put the bonus points in as well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording here if I can remember how. There we go.